Before you press play, take a deep breath. What you're about to hear isn't just a story of betrayal. It's the confession of a woman who walked through hell with a flash drive in her hand and came back carrying her own freedom. If you've ever loved someone so deeply that you lost yourself, this story is for you. The air inside the courtroom felt heavier than the air outside, as if justice itself had weight and I was the one carrying it. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the voices around me, louder than the whispers that bounced off the wooden walls. The bench where I sat was cold, polished, and smelled faintly of dust and old paper. My hands trembled around a small silver pen drive. It was so small, so fragile, and yet it held years of my humiliation, nights of silence, and every tear that had fallen onto my pillow while he slept in another woman's arms. When the judge entered, everyone stood. I didn't. My knees wouldn't obey me. I stayed there, frozen, watching him walk in with that same calm arrogance he had every time he lied. His suit was the same color as the one he wore the day we got married, charcoal gray. Maybe it was on purpose. Maybe he wanted to remind me of what I had lost. I looked at him and felt nothing. Not love, not hate. Just the quiet emptiness that comes after a storm when you can finally see the damage clearly. He turned his head, searching for my face. When our eyes met, a flicker of something crossed his. Surprise, maybe fear. I wasn't the woman who used to cry in silence anymore. I wasn't the wife begging for explanations. I was the one who had seen everything. The videos on that little drive had changed everything. The hotel rooms, the lies, the voices. All the things he thought would remain hidden. The judge began reading the case file, his voice steady, impersonal. My lawyer whispered that soon it would be my turn to speak. I nodded, though I could barely hear him. The only sound in my mind was that of a door closing, the door of the life I once had. I remembered the smell of the coffee he used to bring me in the mornings, the fake tenderness in his touch, the way he used to say, "Trust me," every time I asked too many questions. And then I saw her, the woman sitting 3 seats behind him, pretending not to exist. Her face pale, her hair perfect, her hands nervously clutching a tissue. She couldn't look at me. She didn't need to. I already knew every curve of her face from the recordings. She was in every secret message, every weekend business trip, every lie that had turned me into a ghost inside my own home. I felt my chest tighten, but not from pain anymore, from power. Because for the first time in years, I held the truth. Not rumors, not suspicions, proof. My lawyer had asked me many times if I was sure about showing the videos. I said yes. Not because I wanted to destroy him, but because I needed to save myself, to stand in front of him and let him watch what he had done to me. When the judge called my name, everything went silent. I stood up slowly, feeling the eyes of everyone in that room. My heels echoed on the floor as I walked to the witness stand. The pen drive burned in my hand, as if it knew what was about to happen. "I have evidence," I said, my voice steady but low. "Visual and audio." The judge nodded. My lawyer connected the drive to the computer. The first video began to play on the screen. His voice filled the room, the same soft tone he once used to tell me he loved me. The same lips that swore fidelity were now whispering someone else's name. He froze. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering in panic. The woman behind him started crying quietly. The judge frowned, and I just watched. Years of pain condensed into a few seconds of truth. Every betrayal, every manipulation, now projected in front of strangers who could finally see the monster I had lived with. I didn't look away. Not once. Because that was the moment my life truly stopped and began again. It's strange how betrayal can stain even your happiest memories. When I think back to how it all began, the colors feel different now. They used to be warm. Golden light through a cafe window, the hum of New York traffic outside, the smell of burnt espresso and rain. That's where I first saw him. 2011. I was 25, newly hired at a publishing agency, nervous, exhausted, and still believing that the world rewarded people who loved honestly. He walked in wearing a gray coat and that effortless confidence people either have or learn from watching others suffer. He ordered black coffee, smiled at me, and asked if the seat across was taken. It wasn't. It never was. From that day, I think I handed over pieces of myself, one cup at a time. He made me laugh that first afternoon. Really laugh. The kind that comes from the stomach and makes strangers turn their heads. He asked questions no one had ever asked me before, like what scared me most, or what I'd do if no one was watching. I told him things I hadn't told my best friend. And when he listened, it felt like the whole world had quieted down to make room for my voice. We met again the next day, then the next. By the end of the month, his toothbrush was beside mine, and I was learning the rhythm of his breathing while he slept. He said I made him believe in peace again. He said love shouldn't hurt. He said all the right things. And I, naive enough to think I was special, believed him. When he proposed, it was raining. Brooklyn, April 2013. We were under a leaking awning outside a bookstore. I remember the smell of wet paper and asphalt, and how the ring box slipped slightly from his fingers as he tried to open it. I said yes before he could finish asking. The way he looked at me then, wide-eyed, trembling, almost reverent, made me forget every story my mother had ever told me about how love sometimes disguises itself as control. Our wedding was small, 50 people. His family, loud and cheerful. Mine, cautious. My father whispered before walking me down the aisle, "You're sure, baby?" I said yes, and I meant it. I saw no reason to doubt the man waiting for me in that gray suit, the same one he would wear years later in court. The early years were good, almost perfect. We traveled to Maine, to Montreal, to little places that looked like postcards. He sent me flowers to the office every Friday, always lilies because he said roses were too cliché. I framed the first note he ever wrote me, "To my forever." It hung in our bedroom for a decade. But love has a way of eroding quietly. You don't hear the walls cracking until it's too late. It started small. A missed dinner here, a half-hearted apology there. In 2016, he got a promotion. The late nights became routine. He said it was for us. And I believed him. That's what love does. It teaches you to justify the pain of waiting. By 2018, he barely came home before midnight. I cooked anyway. I left his plate covered, reheated his food when I heard his car, pretended not to notice the lipstick stains on his shirt. I convinced myself they were shadows, reflections, tricks of light. My mother always said denial was the softest pillow a woman could rest on. She was right. One night, I remember asking him if he still loved me. He laughed, kissed my forehead, and said, "You think too much." He smelled of cologne I didn't recognize. When he fell asleep, I cried quietly, the way women cry when they know they shouldn't ask for more. Looking back now, I see it so clearly. The way he trained me to forgive before he even apologized. The way he blurred the line between love and obligation until I couldn't tell them apart. If someone had told me then that I would one day walk into a courtroom to expose him, I would have laughed. I was the devoted wife, the one who sent him good luck texts before meetings, who believed that love could fix anything. But destiny doesn't care about belief. It doesn't care about vows or rings or fairy tale endings. It only cares about truth. And the truth was waiting. In files, in hidden folders, in the quiet hum of a laptop I would one day open at midnight, just to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. That was the night everything began to unravel. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. Betrayal doesn't arrive with thunder or fire. It comes disguised as silence, as subtle absences you can't quite name. I remember the first time I felt something break. It was 2017, the winter after his promotion. The company had moved him to the Midtown office, and he was suddenly too tired to talk after work. He started taking calls in the hallway, lowering his voice when I passed by. At first, I thought it was stress. That's what he said. Stress. He'd kiss my forehead, say, "Don't worry, love, it's just the pressure." And I'd smile, pretending I didn't see the reflection of someone else's perfume shimmering on his jacket. There was a night that December when he came home late, his hair damp from the rain. I asked if he'd eaten. He said yes, too quickly. I noticed a faint lipstick mark just below his collar. Pink, barely visible, but there. I remember laughing nervously, saying, "Should I be jealous?" He smiled, tired, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and said, "Of course not." Then he hugged me, tight enough to erase the question. I told myself that's what love was. Trust over doubt. It's amazing how easy it is to gaslight yourself when you're afraid of being right. By spring, he had a new routine. Gym before work. Client dinners after. He used to text me during lunch, little messages like "thinking of you, miss your face." Now the messages came hours apart. When I asked, he said, "You're overanalyzing again, Mia." I stopped asking. That's how women lose themselves. Not through betrayal itself, but through the exhaustion of having to justify their own intuition. I started noticing things missing. A shirt that smelled of unfamiliar perfume. A hotel receipt in his car for a city he never told me he'd been to. A small gold hairpin on the passenger seat floor. I picked it up once, held it in my palm, and stared at it as if it could speak. It didn't. It just glimmered under the light, mocking me. I placed it in a drawer and told myself it was nothing. Nothing. That word became my armor. Every lie I told myself began with it. He got better at hiding. Passwords on his phone. Deleted call logs. Accidental nights at the office that turned into mornings. When I questioned him, he'd sigh, frustrated, like I was the one breaking the marriage. "You always find problems where there aren't any," he'd say. And then, he'd turn it around. Say I'd changed, that I'd become cold, distant. It's a terrifying thing when the person you love starts narrating your own gaslighting as if it were truth. One evening in 2018, I remember cooking dinner, pasta, his favorite. He didn't come home. I called once, twice, 5 times. No answer. At midnight, I turned off the lights and sat at the table, staring at the 2 plates going cold. When I finally heard the key in the door, my body tensed. He smiled faintly and said, "You're still up?" I wanted to scream, to demand, to beg, but all that came out was, "Do you want me to reheat it?" He kissed my cheek and said, "No, baby. I already ate." He slept beside me that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting his breaths, wondering where he had been. There were other small things. New cologne, unexplained bruises on his neck, a hotel rewards card I found in his wallet, with points accumulated from places we'd never stayed. Each discovery felt like a small cut, invisible at first, but bleeding deeper every time. By 2019, my reflection had changed. I started wearing makeup to cover the tiredness under my eyes. I smiled at friends and said we were fine. I rehearsed lies so well that even I started believing them. But deep down, something had already shifted. Love had turned into surveillance. Every time his phone buzzed, my stomach clenched. Every time he said he had to step out, I memorized the sound of his footsteps, the way his tone changed when he said he'd be right back. One night, while folding laundry, I found a note in his jacket pocket. A small piece of paper with a lipstick mark and the words, "Last night was perfect." I froze. My hands trembled so violently I dropped it. It slid under the table as if trying to hide itself from me. When he got home, I pretended I hadn't seen it. But that night, I couldn't touch him. I turned away, and he asked, "Are you okay?" I said yes. He kissed my shoulder and fell asleep within minutes. I lay there, wide awake, holding back the scream that would have broken everything too soon. That was when I realized I wasn't losing him. I had already lost him. I was losing myself. And still, I stayed. Because leaving felt like failing. Because after years of being told I was overreacting, I had started to believe that maybe I was. Until the day I found the first video. I used to believe that love was built on compromise, that the quiet sacrifices were what made a marriage strong. That's what he taught me, not with words, but with the slow, careful conditioning of everyday life. By the time I realized I was being manipulated, it was already too late. He had rewritten the story of who I was, and I was living inside his version of me. It started with small things. He didn't like when I wore red lipstick, said it drew too much attention. I switched to softer shades. He said my friends were toxic, that they made me doubt him. So I stopped seeing them. He complained about the hours I worked, said he missed me, wanted more time together. I quit the job I loved and took one closer to home. He called that a blessing. I called it love. But love isn't supposed to shrink you. It isn't supposed to make you apologize for existing. By 2019, I was orbiting around him completely. Every decision, every plan, every breath somehow revolved around what would make him happy. He had a way of convincing me that my sacrifices were proof of devotion. When he raised his voice, he called it just stress. When he went silent for days, he said he needed space. When I cried, he said I was too emotional. The worst part was that I believed him. He made me doubt my own memory. There were arguments where I was sure I remembered what he said, but he'd twist the story until I was apologizing for things I hadn't done. "You always exaggerate," he'd say, and I'd shrink a little smaller. "You make everything dramatic," and I'd stay quiet next time. I never said that, and I'd wonder if maybe he was right. It's terrifying how easily you can lose your sense of self when the person you love becomes your mirror. There was one night I'll never forget. March 2020. The pandemic had just begun, and the city was shutting down. We were locked inside the apartment together, two people trapped in a glass house filled with ghosts. He seemed calm at first, even affectionate. He cooked dinner, poured wine, told me how lucky he was to have me. It felt like maybe we were healing. But later, when I mentioned how distant he had been before, his face changed. He slammed his hand on the table and said, "You'll never let anything go, will you?" His voice echoed off the walls. I froze, whispering an apology I didn't owe. He didn't speak to me for 3 days after that. When he finally did, he brought flowers. Lilies, my favorite. He kissed my forehead and said, "See what happens when you push too hard?" It sounded like a warning wrapped in tenderness. And I thanked him. I actually thanked him. That's what emotional captivity looks like. Loving your captor and calling it safety. The isolation grew deeper. My parents lived out of state, and I stopped visiting. He said flights were expensive. My friends texted less and less. He said they didn't really care. The apartment became my entire world, and he became the air I breathed. I was suffocating, but I called it love. There were good days, too, and that's what made it so confusing. Days when he'd wake up early to make breakfast, when he'd touch my face softly and whisper that I was his everything. It's easy to stay when the pain comes with kindness. You start convincing yourself that the cruelty is temporary and the love is permanent. You start rationing happiness like oxygen. In 2021, I remember him promising that things would change. He said he wanted to start over. He said he wanted to take me somewhere quiet, somewhere new. We drove to a lake house upstate that summer. I remember the smell of pine, the way the light hit the water, the way I actually believed him again. I thought maybe this was our turning point. He took pictures of me by the lake, his arm around my waist, his lips on my cheek. Later, I would find out he sent the same photo to someone else with the caption, "She has no idea." It's hard to describe what that kind of discovery does to a person. It doesn't just break your heart. It rearranges your entire perception of reality. Every touch, every kiss, every "I love you" becomes contaminated. I started to realize that his kindness was never love. It was control. Every apology was strategy. Every gift was guilt wrapped in paper. The hardest part was admitting that I wasn't innocent in my own imprisonment. I had built the cage with him. I handed him the keys every time I stayed quiet to keep the peace. I had become an accomplice to my own erasure. That fall, I began keeping a journal. Small, leather-bound, hidden in the lining of my suitcase. I wrote everything. Dates, lies, excuses, changes in tone. At first, it was therapy. Later, it became evidence. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just a marriage falling apart. It was a story that would one day need to be told. And when the truth finally came out, when I found the proof that stripped away every illusion, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, cold and still, realizing that the man I had built my world around had never existed. He was a mask, and I was about to tear it off in front of everyone. The day he asked me to lie for him was the day something inside me cracked for good. It was 2022, early spring. the kind of morning that smells like rain before it falls. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee going cold in my hands, when he came in with that careful calm he used whenever he needed something ugly from me. He sat across from me, adjusted his watch, and said, "Mia, I need you to back me up on something if anyone asks." I remember how still the air became. He told me a woman from his office, yes, that woman, had been spreading rumors, twisting things, trying to ruin his career. He said she'd accused him of crossing a line, of being inappropriate. I asked him what she meant by that, and he looked straight at me, his eyes steady and cold, and said, "You know, I'd never do anything like that." Then he reached across the table and took my hand, his thumb brushing over my skin the same way he used to when he wanted me to surrender. "If anyone calls," he continued, "just say I was with you that weekend." It was a simple request. One sentence, one lie. And yet, that one lie felt like a noose tightening around my neck. For years, I had forgiven him things I couldn't prove. I had swallowed doubts, rewritten memories, and told myself that loyalty was stronger than suspicion. But this was different. This wasn't silence. This was participation. This was him dragging me into the darkness with him, expecting me to build another wall of deceit to protect him, and destroy myself in the process. I didn't answer right away. He stood up, walked behind me, and placed his hands on my shoulders. His grip was gentle, but it felt like iron. "You've always believed in me," he whispered. "Don't stop now." I wanted to pull away, but I didn't move. I sat there, frozen, staring at the reflection of both of us in the glass window. I looked at that woman, the one sitting obediently, pretending to be calm, and I hated her. I hated how small she looked next to him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the rain tapping against the window, trying to understand when love had turned into blackmail. I thought about the vows we made in that little church years ago, how he had promised to protect me, to cherish me, to never make me feel small. And now, he was asking me to lie for him, not just to the world, but to myself. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. He made breakfast, asked about my day, kissed the top of my head before leaving for work. That was his greatest weapon, the ability to wound and then pretend the blood didn't exist. He could make cruelty feel like an illusion, as if I'd imagined the whole thing. A week later, a call came from the office. A woman's voice, calm, professional, asking if I could confirm that Daniel had been with me during the first weekend of March. My chest tightened. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. He was watching me from across the room, eyes locked on mine. I said yes. Just one word. And in that single moment, I felt the last piece of myself crumble. After that, something between us changed. He seemed lighter, more affectionate, as if my silence had proven my loyalty once again. He brought me flowers, cooked dinner, touched me softly like he used to. But every kiss felt like a contract signed in fear. I could see it in his eyes. The awareness that I was now an accomplice, that he had me exactly where he wanted. I began to fade. The laughter left first. Then the appetite. Then the hope. I moved through our home like a shadow, performing the rituals of a wife, cooking, cleaning, smiling, while feeling my insides hollow out. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and not recognize the woman staring back. Then, one night, while cleaning his office, I found a folder on his computer, hidden under layers of renamed files, encrypted and disguised. I don't even remember how I found it. Maybe intuition, maybe desperation. Inside, there were videos. Dozens of them. Hotel rooms, car rides, his voice, her face. My world collapsing in pixels. I watched them in silence, one after another, numb. There were dates that matched the weekends he said he was working late, the same weekends I had defended him to his colleagues, to his friends, even to myself. I saw the truth, frame by frame, and realized that he hadn't just lied to me. He had used me as part of his cover. The next morning he walked into the kitchen, smiling as if nothing had changed. "You're quiet today," he said. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to scream. Not yet. I needed to plan. Because in that moment, the guilt turned to clarity. The fear turned to purpose. And the woman he thought he had destroyed began quietly preparing for the day she would destroy him instead. The night I found the videos, the air in the house changed. It was subtle at first. The way silence seemed to hum against the walls. The way my heart refused to beat at its normal pace. I remember sitting at his desk, the glow of the computer screen painting my face in blue light. My fingers were shaking so hard I could barely move the mouse. Each file had a random name: Report 4, Meeting 23, Invoice 77. It looked ordinary, but when I clicked the first one, I knew. The footage opened with static, then movement. A hotel bed. A woman's laughter. His voice. That voice that had once whispered, I was his world. My throat closed as if the air had turned solid. I clicked pause. My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen, pale, wide-eyed, hollow. I could hear my pulse in my ears. Then I hit play again. I needed to see it. I needed to stop being afraid of the truth I already felt in my bones. He was standing by the window, shirtless, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. He poured wine into 2 glasses, turned, and kissed her. My body reacted before my mind did. Nausea rising, hands clutching the desk to keep from collapsing. I don't know how long I sat there. Time became meaningless. The rain outside was tapping on the glass, steady and slow, like a metronome marking the rhythm of my breaking heart. I opened the next file, then the next. Different rooms, different nights. Sometimes her, sometimes others. There was one from August 2021, our anniversary weekend. He had told me he was at a conference in Boston. I remembered how I sent him messages that weekend. I miss you. Be safe. Come home soon. I watched him in that video laughing, holding another woman's hand, telling her she was the reason he still believed in love. That line, still believed in love, hit me like a blade. It was strange, the calm that came after. I stopped crying. I stopped shaking. I sat there, utterly still, as the truth unfolded in front of me. Betrayal isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It just sits there, breathing next to you, until you finally recognize its face. I spent the next 3 hours gathering everything: the files, the screenshots, the emails. I copied them onto a separate drive, then another. I labeled one Evidence 1 and hid it inside an old book on the shelf. My movements were methodical, mechanical, as if someone else had taken over my body. I was done being the woman who doubted herself. Around 3 in the morning, I heard his car pull into the driveway. My heart didn't race this time. I felt nothing. He walked in quietly, kissed my forehead and said, "You're still awake?" I nodded, pretending to be tired. He smiled, oblivious, poured himself a drink, and went to take a shower. The sound of the water running felt like static in my ears. I stood by the doorway, watching the light under the bathroom door. The fog of the shower began to seep out from the cracks, curling like smoke. I thought of all the nights I had cried while he slept beside me, all the apologies I had whispered into the dark to a man who wasn't there, all the years I had spent being loyal to someone who saw my devotion as a convenience. When he came out, he kissed me again and said, "I love you," and for the first time, I didn't say it back. The next morning, I didn't make breakfast. I didn't pick up his shirts from the cleaners. I didn't ask about his meetings or his schedule. He noticed. He asked if something was wrong. I said no, because there was nothing wrong anymore. The disease had been identified, and I was already planning the cure. For weeks, I acted normal. I went through our routines, smiled when expected, even let him hold me at night. But behind that calm exterior, I was building my case. I learned the power of patience. I read legal forums at midnight, researched digital forensics, watched tutorials on how to recover deleted data. Every secret he tried to bury, I unearthed. I became my own investigator. And with every piece of proof I collected, I felt my fear fading. He had built an empire of lies, but he had built it carelessly, leaving traces, receipts, timestamps, the arrogance of a man who believed no one would ever dare to confront him. One night, I found something different. An email chain. It wasn't just about affairs. It was about money, hidden accounts, fraudulent invoices, transactions made in my name. He hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He had used me to cover his own corruption. That was the moment I stopped being heartbroken and started being strategic. It was no longer about love. It was about survival. When I looked at him after that, I didn't see my husband. I saw my enemy. And enemies, I learned, don't deserve confrontation. They deserve exposure. That was the night I whispered to myself, he's going to watch himself fall. And I meant every word. It took weeks before I dared to touch the files again. I kept the laptop hidden in the closet, wrapped in an old sweater, as if even the metal casing might betray my secret. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't tremble. I moved through each day with a calm so complete that he mistook it for reconciliation. He thought I had forgiven him. He thought the silence meant surrender. But silence, I learned, is where revenge is born. The idea came quietly one night in May 2022. I was sitting on the floor of the living room, lights off, watching the faint glow of the city flicker through the curtains. I had been reviewing the evidence again. Every image, every sound. It wasn't the betrayal that hurt me anymore. It was the way he smiled in those videos, so sure of his immunity, so casual in his cruelty. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't even afraid. That was when I decided he would learn fear the way I had. Slowly, intimately, and without warning. I bought the pen drive the next morning. Just an ordinary silver one, $15 at a corner electronics store. The cashier didn't look at me twice. To him, I was just another woman buying a piece of hardware. But in my hands, it wasn't just hardware. It was a weapon. A quiet, modern blade. I spent 3 nights preparing it, compressing files, renaming folders, organizing timestamps. It became my masterpiece. Chronological proof of the life I had been forced to live in the shadows of his lies. Every folder was labeled by date, every clip annotated. The care I once put into loving him, I now put into destroying him. The first time I tested it, I plugged it into my own laptop. It worked perfectly. The screen filled with thumbnails. His face, his voice, his sin. I watched one for a few seconds, long enough to make sure the audio was clear. It was. His laughter filled the room, cruel and familiar. I closed the laptop and stared at the pen drive in my hand. It looked small, harmless, almost innocent. I smiled for the first time in months. But revenge isn't just about evidence. It's about timing. You don't rush it. You let it ripen. You let the guilty become comfortable again. I waited. I let him rebuild his sense of control. He started leaving me notes again, calling me during the day, pretending to care. He talked about taking a trip to Italy, about fresh starts and new beginnings. He didn't know that the only trip he'd be taking soon would be to court. Every time he kissed me, I thought about the pen drive. Every time he said, "I love you," I imagined the moment his voice would echo through the courtroom, replayed for strangers to hear. I began confiding in no one. Revenge, I realized, cannot survive an audience. It feeds on secrecy. Even my lawyer at first didn't know the full extent of what I had. He only knew that I wanted a divorce and that I wanted it clean. "We'll need proof," he said. I looked him straight in the eye and whispered, "I have it." When I finally handed him a copy of the drive, he looked at me differently, not as a victim, but as a strategist. "You understand what this means, right?" he asked. "If we present this, there's no going back." "There's nothing to go back to," I said. He nodded, slid the drive into a sealed envelope, and placed it inside his briefcase. I remember the click of the lock, a sound that felt like closure. That night, I couldn't sleep, not from fear, but from clarity. The rain tapped against the window again, just like the night I found the videos. Only this time it sounded different, softer, almost like applause. I stood in front of the mirror and studied my face. The fine lines near my eyes, the exhaustion that had carved itself into my features. But beneath all that, there was something new, strength. cold, deliberate strength. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like the author of the final chapter. The morning of the hearing, I placed the pen drive in my purse. I could feel its weight through the fabric. I knew exactly what it contained and what it would do. It wasn't just proof of his infidelity. It was a record of my resurrection. When he saw me that morning, he smiled, as if we were still playing the same old game. But I smiled back this time, and that was the moment he should have known. The rules had changed. Because I wasn't the woman he deceived anymore. I was the woman who had the evidence. The morning of the hearing felt like walking through a dream I had already seen too many times. The air outside the courthouse was damp with fog, the kind that sticks to your clothes and makes everything feel heavier. I arrived early, wearing the same black suit I had bought for his promotion years ago, the one I had ironed with pride back then, never knowing it would become my armor today. My lawyer met me at the steps, briefcase in hand, eyes sharp but kind. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. Everything that needed to be said was on that small silver drive in his pocket. Inside, the courtroom was colder than I remembered. The walls were pale, the benches smooth and worn from years of stories like mine, people arriving as lovers and leaving as enemies. When he walked in, the sound of his shoes echoed like a metronome through the room. He looked immaculate as always. Pressed suit, polished cufflinks, the scent of expensive cologne. I could almost admire his performance if I didn't know what hid behind it. He smiled when he saw me. That same disarming smile that had once made me forget why I was angry. But not this time. This time, his charm slid off me like water over glass. The judge entered, and everyone stood. My heart didn't race anymore. I felt steady, almost detached, like an observer watching the final act of a long, exhausting play. When I sat back down, my eyes flicked briefly to the back of the room, and there she was, the woman behind him, the mistress. Her hair was tied neatly, her blouse buttoned too high, her face pale. She avoided my gaze, but she didn't have to look at me. I knew she could feel it, the weight of what was coming. The proceedings began. His lawyer spoke first, calm and deliberate, describing our marriage as strained, our relationship as mutually broken. He painted a picture of misunderstanding, of two good people who had simply drifted apart. I watched the performance unfold like a play I had already read the script for. My lawyer didn't interrupt. He waited, just like I did, letting the lies exhaust themselves. Then the judge turned to me. "Mrs. Allen," she said, "do you have anything to add?" I stood, my palms pressed against the wooden table to keep them from shaking. My voice came out softer than I expected, but it didn't waver. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I do." My lawyer handed the pen drive to the bailiff, who plugged it into the court's computer. For a moment, the screen flickered blue, and then came to life. The sound of his voice filled the room. It was his laughter first, that soft, intimate tone he reserved for moments when he wanted to be irresistible. Then came the images. A hotel room, a bed, his body next to hers. His words, the same ones he once used on me, spoken now to someone else. The room went silent except for the audio. His voice calling her name, the faint hum of the air conditioner, the betrayal projected larger than life on the courtroom wall. He froze. The confident man who had walked in minutes earlier now looked small, his face drained of color. His lawyer stammered, objected, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "Continue," she said. The next clip began. Another hotel, another date. The timestamp glowed in the corner of the screen, the same weekend he had sworn he was at a business retreat. My lawyer said nothing. The evidence spoke louder than any argument ever could. The woman behind him began to cry softly, her hand covering her mouth. He turned to look at her, his expression a mixture of panic and shame. I didn't look away. I wanted him to feel what it meant to be seen, truly seen, without control, without escape. The judge finally turned off the screen. The silence that followed was thick, like a held breath. She leaned back, hands folded, and said quietly, "Mr. Allen, do you have anything to say in response to this evidence?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The lawyer beside him whispered frantically, but he just stared at the table. In that moment, I realized something. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about justice. It was about reclaiming the narrative he had stolen from me. For years, he had controlled every version of our story. The loving husband, the misunderstood man, the victim of a paranoid wife. But now, in front of strangers and under oath, the truth had finally chosen sides. When the judge spoke again, her voice was firm. "We will reconvene after a short recess. The evidence will remain on record." As people stood, the noise of movement filled the room. Papers rustling, chairs scraping, whispers breaking the tension. He turned toward me then, his eyes desperate. "Why would you do this?" he mouthed, almost inaudible. I held his gaze, my expression calm. "Because the truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to exist." I gathered my things slowly, the faint weight of the pen driving my purse like a heartbeat against my side. As I passed by him, I caught the faint scent of his cologne, the same one I used to love. For a second, memories tried to surface. The laughter, the dinners, the moments that once meant everything. But they didn't hurt anymore. They were just scenes from a life that no longer belonged to me. Outside, the air felt cleaner, the fog had lifted, and sunlight was breaking through the clouds. I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing deeply, feeling the world tilt back into balance. The pen drive was still in my hand, warm from my grip, humming quietly with the power of truth. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a victim or a wife. I felt like the author of my own freedom. The news spread faster than I ever imagined. By the following week, his name had already leaked from the courthouse. Whispers in the office hallways. Rumors online. Words like affair, fraud, evidence, and trial echoing through the city like bells announcing a downfall. The same man who had once been the golden boy of his company, the one invited to every event and praised for his charm, was now being quietly erased from the photographs. Colleagues stopped returning his calls. Partners withdrew contracts. The empire he had built on lies was crumbling, not because I tore it apart, but because I simply stepped away and let gravity do what it always does. The court sessions became colder after that. His lawyer tried to contain the damage, filing motions, questioning credibility, pleading for privacy. But the footage spoke louder than strategy. There were timestamps, hotel receipts, credit card records. The truth had a rhythm of its own, precise and unrelenting. The financial records sealed his fate. Fake invoices, falsified travel expenses, transactions linked to accounts under my name. Every document was a nail in the coffin of his carefully crafted persona. During one of the final hearings, I watched him lose his composure for the first time. He stood, his voice shaking, insisting that it was all a misunderstanding, that he loved me, that he was being set up. The judge's expression didn't change. My lawyer didn't even rise to object. The silence that followed his outburst was louder than any accusation. He sat down slowly, his head bowed, his hands trembling. I had seen him angry, smug, manipulative, but never small. That was the day I realized the difference between power and control. Power is earned, control is borrowed. And he had finally run out of credit. Outside the courthouse, I was greeted by reporters. Cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, voices overlapping. "Mrs. Allen, is it true? Did you know about the fraud? How long had this been happening?" I didn't answer any of them. I just walked to the waiting car, each flash of light feeling less like an invasion and more like confirmation. The world finally saw what I had endured in the dark. At home, his things were gone. The closet half empty, the drawers quiet. His scent lingered faintly in the air, but even that felt different now. Not comforting, not painful, just a trace of something finished. The space felt bigger without his presence, like the walls themselves were exhaling after years of holding their breath. Days turned into weeks, and the calls began. Messages from his number that I never opened. Apologies, confessions, promises. He wanted to meet. He wanted to explain. But there was nothing left to explain. I had heard every version of his lies already. The soft ones wrapped in affection, the desperate ones wrapped in guilt. This time, I didn't answer. Silence was the only language he would understand now. When the final verdict came, it was almost anticlimactic. The judge ruled in my favor. Full separation, compensation, and the acknowledgement of emotional and financial misconduct. I sat in that wooden chair as the words echoed through the courtroom, each sentence heavier than the last. He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on the table, the same table where he had once smiled with arrogance. Afterward, I stepped outside into the afternoon light. The city was loud, alive, indifferent. I walked for a while without destination, just letting the noise of life drown out the ghosts that had lived in my head for years. When I passed by a cafe, I stopped, the same cafe where we first met, the same corner table where he had once smiled at me like I was the beginning of everything. Someone else was sitting there now, laughing with a stranger. I stood outside for a moment, watching, then turned away. That night I went home and opened the small box where I had kept the pen drive. I turned it over in my hand, feeling its smooth edges. It no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like a relic, a reminder of what happens when you confuse love with surrender. I placed it in the back of a drawer and closed it softly. He called one last time before the restraining order took effect. I didn't pick up, but I listened to the voicemail. His voice was broken, trembling, almost childlike. He said he was sorry, that he didn't know why he did it, that he wished he could undo everything. For a brief second, I felt something close to pity, not for the man he was, but for the man he could have been if he had chosen truth over pride. Then I deleted it. People think revenge feels like fire, hot, wild, consuming, but it doesn't. It feels like snow, quiet, cold, still. It covers everything evenly and leaves you standing there, breathless, staring at a world made new. When the divorce papers arrived, I signed them in silence. No tears, no shaking hands. Just a calm I hadn't felt in years. He had fallen, completely, and I hadn't even needed to push. The morning after the verdict, I woke to silence. Not the kind that feels heavy and waiting, but the clean, open kind. The sound of absence finally making peace with itself. Sunlight spilled through the blinds, cutting narrow golden lines across the bed where he no longer slept. For a moment, I didn't move. I just watched the light touch the empty space beside me and thought, so this is what freedom feels like. It wasn't loud, it wasn't triumphant, it was stillness. I got up, made coffee, and sat by the window. The street below was waking up. Buses rumbling, people rushing, dogs barking, the city carrying on like it always had. For years, I'd felt trapped in the same routine. Each day, another loop of waiting, apologizing, pretending. Now the world felt wider, even though nothing outside had changed. It was me. I had changed. In the weeks that followed, I started reclaiming the small things first. I changed the locks. I painted the bedroom walls a pale blue, lighter than the gray he always preferred. I donated half the furniture, the dishes we'd picked together, the framed photographs that once told a lie. I kept only one, the one where I'm standing alone at the lake house, eyes half closed, the water behind me still. He had taken it, but the image belonged to me. It was proof that even then, I had been real. Freedom didn't arrive as joy. It arrived as truth. And truth, I learned, is quieter than you expect. It doesn't dance. It doesn't celebrate. It just sits beside you like an old friend and waits for you to breathe. Some nights I still dream of him. Not the man who betrayed me, but the version I first met, the one with soft eyes and hopeful words. In those dreams, we are always at that cafe, laughing like we used to. But even in the dream, I know better. I can feel the lie behind the smile. I wake before he can speak. I wake knowing that love, when poisoned, doesn't vanish. It transforms into something else, into clarity. People sometimes ask me if it was worth it. The exposure, the humiliation, the trial. If revenge ever really heals. I don't know if healing is the right word. What I found wasn't healing. It was reclamation. I took back my story. I made him face the truth. And in doing so, I finally saw myself not as the woman he betrayed, but as the woman who survived him. A few months later, I went back to work. The same company that had watched me shrink for years now watched me return. Quieter, steadier. I learned to walk without waiting for permission. I learned to sleep without fear of doors opening at midnight. I learned that peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the presence of self. One evening, I walked past the courthouse again. The steps were empty, the air warm with the first signs of summer. I sat for a while, tracing the cracks in the stone with my fingertips. The last time I had stood there, I was trembling, clutching the pen drive like a weapon. Now, I was just there, whole, breathing, unburdened. Before leaving, I took the pen drive out of my purse. I had carried it for months, not because I needed it anymore, but because it reminded me of the day I stopped begging to be believed. I placed it on the steps, a small offering to the version of me who had survived long enough to see this day. Then I stood, turned my back on the courthouse, and walked away without looking back. Freedom doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with music or applause. It slips in quietly, in the way you take a deeper breath, in the way you smile at strangers, in the way you stop rehearsing pain. That night, I lay in bed and thought about everything. The years of sacrifice, the manipulation, the discovery, the vengeance. And beneath all of it, I found something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for what happened, but for what it revealed. Because sometimes the destruction of one life is the birth of another. The clock ticked softly in the dark. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer. Not for him, not for justice, but for peace. And for the first time in so many years, I slept without fear, without guilt, without pretending. Because the war was over, and I had finally won by walking away.